What if a quiet, elderly man in a dusty pickup truck wasn't just a relic of the past, but a hero who'd kept a promise for 47 years? Walter Briggs, a 78-year-old veteran, was stopped at a routine security checkpoint, and what followed would change everything. His long-hidden mission, tied to a secret military unit and a box containing a forgotten emblem, would unravel a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and unbroken honor. What secrets did Walter carry, and why did his simple act of returning a long-lost symbol spark a national security operation? Stay tuned to uncover the truth behind this extraordinary journey. Walter Briggs was 78 years old, a solitary soul tucked away in a modest rural home on the eastern fringe of Texas. Can you imagine? His weathered hands, rough with calluses from decades of honest toil, told stories his lips never did. Those eyes of his, oh, they held the quiet wisdom of a man who'd seen more than he'd ever share. To the folks of Mill Creek County, he was just Old Man Briggs, a quiet fixture who'd nod respectfully as he passed by on the dusty road. For nearly 60 years, he'd driven the same 1962 GMC pickup truck, a relic that somehow clung to life, just like Walter himself. That truck with its faded blue paint, cracked leather seats, and an engine that roared like a lion half a mile away, was as much a part of the county as the courthouse clock tower or the ancient oak on Main Street. The kids in town, bless their hearts, called it the war truck, giggling at its battle scars and old-school charm, never guessing the deep truth hidden in their playful name. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, Walter would rumble through town, picking up his sparse necessities, always the same items, always paid with exact change, as if pennies were as precious as promises. He wasn't cold, mind you, just sparing with words, as if he'd learned long ago to ration speech like a soldier rations water in the field. Why waste words when silence speaks louder? But on this particular Tuesday evening, with the twilight painting the horizon in hues of gold and purple, Walter did something extraordinary. After decades of routine, he broke the pattern. In the dim light of his simple home, he handled a small object with such care, wrapping it in soft cloth as if it were a sacred relic. He placed it in a hand-carved wooden box, securing it with a humble brass lock. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost holy. Can you picture the reverence in his trembling hands? Beside the box, he set a handwritten letter, the cursive script wobbling with the slight tremor of age. The envelope bore a simple address: Precinct 17, Police Department. Inside, the note was clear and urgent: "Deliver this to Precinct 17. Don't let anyone else touch it." With a heavy heart, Walter placed both treasures on the passenger seat of his trusty truck, fired up that familiar rumbling engine, and set out on a 40-mile journey to the county seat. No radio, no companion, just him and the mechanical hum of a truck that had been his partner through life's long roads. As he crossed the county line, an unexpected sight greeted him: a security checkpoint, rare for this sleepy stretch of highway. Recent border concerns, perhaps. A young officer, barely 25, waved him over, his flashlight cutting through the dusk. Walter eased the war truck to a stop beside a patrol car, its lights flashing like a warning. "License and registration, please," the officer said, his voice sharp with routine. Walter, calm as ever, reached into his pocket, pulling out a wallet as worn as his hands. From it he drew a driver's license, so faded the photo was a ghost, though the expiration date still held. The officer squinted at it, skeptical. "What brings you out so late, Mr. Briggs?" he asked, suspicion creeping in. "Police business," Walter replied, his gravelly voice steady, worn by age but firm with purpose. "Police business," the officer's brow furrowed. "Mind if I take a look at your vehicle?" Walter's hand drifted protectively to the wooden box. "What's in my truck isn't for curious eyes, son," he said, his tone gentle but unyielding. "It's for Precinct 17 and only Precinct 17. The officer's hand twitched toward his holster, tension crackling in the air. "Step out of the vehicle, sir. I need to check the contents of your truck." Walter's eyes, steady as stone, met the young man's. "I can't let you do that," he said, calm but resolute. "This isn't ordinary cargo." Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars screeched to a halt, their lights painting the night red and blue. Officers surrounded Walter, their stances tense, as if this quiet old man was a threat. A threat after all he'd been through. Last chance, sir, the young officer barked. Exit the vehicle and consent to a search, or we'll have to detain you. Walter studied their faces, so young, so full of authority and uncertainty. Could they understand the weight of a promise kept for 47 years? I believe you're making a mistake, he said softly, but I won't resist. As the officers approached with handcuffs, Walter's mind wasn't on his pride or freedom. No, his heart was with that box, holding a symbol of honor that had waited decades to find its way home. Oh, what must he have felt, knowing its journey wasn't yet complete. Precinct 17 buzzed with a strange energy that Tuesday night. Word of the elderly man in custody spread like wildfire. Some whispered he was a smuggler. Others wondered if dementia had clouded his mind. The officers processed Walter with cold efficiency, taking fingerprints from hands that had once held lives in their grip. Did they know the stories those hands could tell? The booking officer paused, puzzled as Walter's fingerprints triggered an odd response in the system. Not a criminal record, but a mysterious security flag, unlike anything he'd seen. He flagged it to his supervisor, who shrugged it off. "Keep going, let the system sort it out," he said, dismissing the anomaly. But Captain Reynolds, the night shift supervisor, watched from his office, his instincts prickling. Something about Walter's quiet dignity, his lack of fear or confusion, didn't fit the profile of a lawbreaker. Who was this man sitting so calmly on that metal bench? Who called this in? Reynolds asked the desk sergeant, his eyes fixed on Walter's straight back, hands resting precisely on his knees, gaze piercing through the chaos of the station. "Checkpoint at County Line, sir," came the reply. Said the old-timer was acting suspicious, refused a vehicle search, claimed he had police business but wouldn't elaborate. Reynolds nodded, his years in law enforcement whispering a truth. That posture, that bearing, it screamed military. Meanwhile, in the evidence room, Officer Tanner and his partner, gloved and cautious, examined the wooden box and letter seized from Walter's truck. "Strange construction," Tanner muttered, running a finger over the hand-carved wood. "Decades old, mate." His partner pointed to faint markings along the bottom edge. "Look at this, stamped, then sanded down. What's that about?" With authorization logged, they pried open the brass lock, lifting the lid to reveal what? A military insignia, nestled in velvet, its craftsmanship breathtaking. It wasn't like any standard decoration, with an encrypted serial number and an unfamiliar seal. "This is military, but different," Tanner said, snapping photos from every angle, careful not to touch it. "High-ranking too, by the look of it." His partner unfolded the letter, eyes widening. "Listen to this." The bearer entrusted to Precinct 17. "The original insignia of Echo Shadow Unit, retrieved from Firebase Horizon, Vietnam 1975, to be returned to rightful military authorities upon confirmation of Protocol Silverline. May those who fell be remembered. May those who wait find peace." Signed, Colonel Jonathan Briggs, USMC, retired. Tanner's jaw dropped. "Related to our guy. Same last name." He held Walter's ID next to the letter. "Echo Shadow Unit. Never heard of it, have you?" His partner shook his head. "Run it through the system now." Back in his office, Captain Reynolds faced Walter, whose posture remained ramrod straight. "Mr. Briggs, we've examined the box you were carrying," he said, watching for a reaction. "Care to explain why you're hauling what looks like valuable military property?" Walter's gaze was unflinching. "I'm returning it to where it belongs," he said simply. "Why a police station, not a military base?" Reynolds pressed. "Protocol Silverline requires civilian authority as first contact," Walter replied, his words cryptic, heavy with meaning. Reynolds leaned in. "You could have saved yourself a heap of trouble by explaining at the checkpoint." A sad smile flickered across Walter's face, etched with years of sacrifice. "Some promises demand discretion, Captain, even when it's inconvenient." Was that grief in his eyes? Pride? "So you're tied to this Colonel Jonathan Briggs?" Reynolds asked, tapping the letter. Walter's voice softened. "I've never needed titles to do what's right." Before Reynolds could dig deeper, Officer Tanner burst in, voice low and urgent. "Sir, the insignia triggered an alert. The Department of Defense just sent a priority message. Secure the item and the individual. No further questioning." Reynolds frowned. "On whose authority?" "Joint Chiefs level, sir." Tanner's eyes were wide. "They say the man in custody is a former commanding officer of Shadow Echo Unit. Military reps are on their way," ETA 1 hour. The room fell silent, the weight of those words sinking in. Walter Briggs, the quiet old man with the beat-up truck, was no ordinary soul. Whatever he carried was big enough to rattle the highest ranks of the military. Outside, officers whispered in clusters, their earlier assumptions crumbling. Who was this man, really? What was in that box? Through the office window, Walter saw their curious stares but remained calm, hands steady on his knees. The wooden box sat on Reynolds' desk, a silent bridge to a world few knew existed. "Mr. Briggs," Reynolds said at last, his tone softer, "it seems we've mishandled this. My apology." Walter shook his head gently. "You did your job, Captain, and I did mine." A pause then. "Would you like some coffee while we wait?" Reynolds nodded, respect creeping into his voice. "Black, if you have it," Walter replied. "It's been a long drive." As midnight neared, the station hummed with anticipation. Every officer felt it. Something extraordinary was unfolding, even if they couldn't name it. Security tightened, the building locked down, and Walter, no longer a suspect, but not quite a guest, waited patiently for those who knew the truth of his mission. What secrets did that box hold to stir such a storm? Right at the stroke of midnight, the Precinct 17 station's perimeter sensors blared to life. Officers glued to the security monitors could hardly believe their eyes. 6 sleek, identical black SUVs, emblazoned with military markings, rolled into the parking lot in perfect chilling formation. Can you imagine the sight? No sirens, no flashing lights, just the eerie precision of a military operation unfolding like a scene from a movie. The SUV's headlights snapped off in unison, plunging the lot into darkness, save for the stark glow of the station's exterior lights. What was happening? Doors swung open simultaneously, and uniformed figures spilled out, moving with such practiced grace, it was clear this was no ordinary patrol. They sealed off every exit and entrance, their coordinated steps screaming purpose far beyond routine police work. Inside, officers crowded around the monitors, hearts racing with a mix of awe and unease. The night dispatcher tried to raise them on the radio, but all he got was a curt, secure channel established. "Stand by for senior officer." What kind of operation was this? What the hell is going on? A young officer whispered, his voice trembling. "Is this some kind of training drill?" A grizzled sergeant shook his head, eyes narrowed. "No way, kid. Those are Joint Special Operations insignias. This is way above our pay grade." Captain Reynolds, sensing the gravity of the moment, straightened his uniform and barked, "Stand at attention, all of you." Whatever was unfolding, it was bigger than their usual protocols, bigger than anything they'd ever seen. The station's front doors swung open, and in strode 3 figures, 2 military police officers, stern and imposing, flanking a distinguished man in his 60s, his 3-star general's uniform gleaming with authority. "General Thomas Harrington, United States Marine Corps," he declared to the desk sergeant, flashing credentials that demanded instant respect. "I understand you're holding Walter Briggs and a wooden box he brought to your station." The sergeant, wide-eyed, stammered, "Yes, Captain Reynolds is with Mr. Briggs in his office. The items secured. Take me to them now," Harrington commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. As the general marched through the station, every officer snapped to attention, feeling the weight of history in his presence. When he stepped into the captain's office, his gaze locked onto Walter, who rose to his feet with a fluid grace that defied his. And then, oh, can you believe it? The general, a man who advised presidents and commanded thousands, approached Walter Briggs and delivered a crisp, formal military salute. "Commander Briggs," he said, his voice thick with reverence, "it's an honor." Walter returned the salute with flawless precision, his weathered face steady but proud. "The honor's mine, General," he replied softly, "though I haven't been a commander in nearly 50 years." Captain Reynolds and his officers exchanged stunned glances. The quiet old man they'd handcuffed, the one in faded clothes driving that beat-up truck, was being honored by one of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. military. Who was this man? "Really? I apologize for the dramatic entrance, Captain," the general said, turning to Reynolds, "but this involves national security protocols from the Vietnam conflict. It's no small matter." He paused and added, "May we use your conference room? I need to debrief Commander Briggs properly." 20 minutes later, the station's largest conference room was unrecognizable. Maps sprawled across the table, classified files cracked open, recording devices disabled. At the center sat the wooden box, now open, its military insignia gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a silent testament to a long-hidden truth. The general faced the assembled officers, Walter seated quietly beside him, his presence commanding despite his silence. "What I'm about to share is classified," Harrington began, his voice grave, "but you deserve to know the significance of tonight. It's not every day you witness history." He gestured to Walter, his eyes shining with respect. "This man is Walter Briggs, former commander of Shadow Echo Unit, a special operations team, so secret it officially never existed. In 1975, during the fall of Saigon, his unit was sent on a classified extraction mission that went horribly, tragically wrong. The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop, every eye darting between the general and the elderly man who sat with such quiet dignity. Commander Briggs was the only survivor," Harrington continued, his voice heavy. "He saved 37 lives, but lost 11 of his men. Their sacrifice haunts him still." He lifted the insignia from the box, holding it with care. Before he was evacuated, Briggs recovered this emblem, a promise to the families of his fallen brothers, that he'd ensure their sacrifice was honored when the time came. This insignia holds microfilm, with mission details and the names of those who served, locked away under classified protocols, until Operation Silverline was declassified just 3 weeks ago. He turned to Walter, his expression softening. "Your son, Colonel Jonathan Briggs, carried on your fight for recognition until his death last year in a classified operation. He secured the Silverline Protocol's activation, and the letter he left you held the authentication code." Walter's eyes glistened, the first crack in his stoic facade, a father's pride and grief intertwined. "Jonathan always knew what duty meant," he whispered, his voice barely audible but heavy with love. "Can you imagine carrying that weight for decades?" The general faced Reynolds directly, his tone firm. "Your officers didn't stop a confused old man tonight, Captain. They intercepted a final mission by one of the most decorated covert operators in American history, a man honoring a promise that spanned nearly 5 decades. The young officer who'd first detained Walter stepped forward, his face flushed with shame. "Sir, I need to apologize to Mr. Briggs." "If I'd known," Walter raised a hand, gentle but firm. "You did your duty, son," he said kindly. "I've never blamed anyone for that." The general nodded, his voice resolute. Commander Briggs wasn't seeking glory. He was upholding the warrior's pact. "We never leave anyone behind, not even in memory." Every officer in the room stood taller, their respect for Walter palpable. The man they'd processed, handcuffed, was a hero who'd borne a burden of honor longer than most of them had been alive. How could they have misjudged him so? "Today," Harrington continued, "we're not here to take someone into custody. We're here to escort Commander Briggs to Andrews Air Force Base, where tomorrow morning, the President himself will recognize the Shadow Echo Unit and present Briggs with the honors his men earned through their sacrifice." As Walter stood to leave, Reynolds stepped forward, his voice earnest. "Sir, we'd be honored to provide a police escort for your journey." Walter's weathered face broke into a genuine smile, warm and rare. "That's kind, Captain, but I've got one request." "Anything, sir," Reynolds replied eagerly. "I want to drive my own truck to Andrews," Walter said, his eyes twinkling. "It's carried me this far, seems only right it finishes the journey." The general let out a hearty laugh. "Consider it done, Commander. That old GMC's earned its place in this story." As Walter walked toward the exit, every officer lined the hallway, standing at attention, their eyes filled with awe. This humble man in simple clothes moved among them with a quiet confidence, a warrior completing a mission that had defined his life for nearly half a century. What must it feel like to carry such honor? A week later, the story exploded across local and national news. Oldest truck in county belongs to secret war hero, former Shadow Echo commander, honored after. The ceremony at Andrews Air Force Base was both solemn and joyous, a long overdue tribute to courage and sacrifice. Footage captured Walter Briggs, no longer the stooped figure in faded clothes, but a warrior in a crisp dress uniform, rows of classified medals gleaming on his chest, standing tall beside the president. Can you picture the pride in his eye? As the names of his fallen team were read aloud, family members stepped forward to receive honors, many meeting Walter for the first time, though he'd carried their loved ones' memories for nearly 50. The transformation was staggering. Shoulders squared, chin high, eyes clear and focused, Walter was every inch the commander he'd once been. Observers whispered about the president's deference, how he listened intently as Walter spoke softly of each fallen soldier,
honoring them with every word. Behind the stage, Walter's old GMC truck stood proud, parked between two sleek military vehicles, a symbol of endurance. Someone had polished it to a shine, though Walter insisted they keep the dents and scratches. They're part of the story, he'd said, and who could argue? When he took the podium, the crowd, military brass, officials and grieving families fell silent, hanging on his every word. Honor, he began, his voice steady despite his years, doesn't live in medals or applause. It lives in the promises we keep, even when no one remembers we made them. Those words, spoken by a man who'd lived them so completely, echoed through the assembly and across the nation, a reminder of duty in an age of fleeting fame. Could there be a truer testament to integrity? After the ceremony, Walter declined a military transport, choosing instead to climb into his trusty GMC, its engine rumbling as he began the journey home, a military escort trailing respectfully behind. Along the highways, crowds gathered on overpasses, waving flags and holding signs, thanking a hero most hadn't known existed days before. In Mill Creek County, the homecoming was intimate. At the checkpoint where he'd been stopped, officers now stood at attention as he passed, saluting the man they'd once detained. Children who'd mocked the war truck now gazed at it with reverence, understanding that its scars were earned in honor. The military awarded Walter a special commendation for his unwavering fidelity, but what touched him most was a small brass plaque fixed to his truck's dashboard. Walter Briggs, keeper of promises for 47 years. Can you feel the weight of those words? The following Sunday, in a moment so poignant it could break your heart, the families of the Shadow Echo unit gathered at Walter's modest home, unannounced, bearing photographs, letters and stories of the men who never came back. They shared memories with the one man who'd never forgotten a single face or name, creating a living memorial more powerful than any stone monument. In the months that followed, Walter's life stayed much the same, driving into town for supplies, living simply, but the world saw him differently, and maybe he carried himself a little lighter, the burden of his promise finally lifted. When a young reporter cornered him outside the diner, asking what it felt like to have his story known, Walter paused, his eyes thoughtful. Recognition isn't why good men do hard things, he said. We do them because they're right, whether anyone's watching or not. With a gentle smile, he climbed into his truck and drove off, a man at peace with his past, his mission complete after nearly half a century. What kind of strength does it take to live like that? Get out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them. A flashlight beam stabbed into Walter's eyes as his truck rolled to a stop at the station's entrance at midnight, sweat beading on his brow. Opening the truck bed, he said simply, "I'm just returning what doesn't belong to me." A shrill alert pierced the night, and minutes later, those black SUVs materialized from the darkness, surrounding the station with silent menace. What had Walter brought to Precinct 17 to spark such a response? His quiet courage, his unbroken promise, had set history in motion, and the world would never forget.